Tov, good morning, Kahal Kadosh, Beruchim Abaim to everyone. Today, beautiful Sunday, right? The 20th of Sivan, corresponding to the 19th day of June. And this week's class graciously sponsored by Mr. Victor Mizrahi Cohen from Mexico. Le'ilui Nishmat, his beloved father, Eliyahu Ben Lela, Alav Shalom. Additionally, today's class graciously sponsored by Mrs. Joyce Towell and family. Le'ilui Nishmat, her beloved husband, David Ben Pauline. Mr. David Towell, Hurdle, if you remember him vividly, right? Many of you remember him through our daily Gemara and Daf Yomi class, and a dear member of our congregation for many years. Someone who truly helped people, guided people, trained rabbis in the public speaking and the counseling department, etc. Someone that went through a lot in his life, but he maximized his life lessons to help others. So Be'ezat Hashem will dedicate today's learning also in his memory, Alehem Shalom. So we know that this week's Parasha Shelah, talks about the story of the Meragelim. For those that were here yesterday, Musaf and the Havdalah tone utilized by our Hazzanim, it follows the makam called makam Hijaz. This makam, which the Kahal Kadosh is familiar with this topic, the makam literally means the tune that the Hazzanim will be using the Shabbat. And this tune is a bit mournful. It's a very similar tone that it's utilized around the time of Tisha B'Av. Why? First, the foundation of Tisha B'Av is actually this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion, as we all know, is the story of the Meragelim, right? The spies that were sent to scout the land of Israel. 10 of them came back by giving a very negative and derogatory report about the land of Israel, with the exception of the last two, Yoshua bin Nun and Caleb ben Yefuneh. Comes Rashi and asked, I don't understand, what is the connection from last week's Torah portion that has nothing to do, if you follow the chronological chain of events, these were two separate times in Jewish history. Why the Torah puts together the incident of the end of the Parasha Be'alotecha, that talks about Miriam making a comment about Moshe and about the wife of Moshe, and the story of the Meragelim. I'm saying this only just to open up the floor to introduce the fascinating message of the Zohar of today. So Rashi comes and asks actually these questions, and it says, very simple, it says, they should have learned from Miriam. If Miriam made a simple, innocent comment about her sister-in-law, and she paid the price through Sara to speak against the land of Israel, which also we need to read the Pesukim. And do me a favor, go through the Pesukim of the Parasha, and I, Belineder, will catch up with you throughout the week, to the point that once the Meragelim, they started to speak ill about the land of Israel, they also spoke against God. That's the problem. They spoke against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When they said, Gadol hu mimenu, they said, even God may not be able, God forbid, to say such a thing, to defeat the giants who live in the land of Israel. But we know this. Once the person is blinded, the person goes down the drain very rapidly. But comes the Zohar Kadosh and takes this parasha as a foundation for a beautiful message. But I think that was important for me to give this introduction to understand the pasuk that says, "Vayavo ad nahal eshkol." The Meragelim, the Torah tells us which trip, which journey they went through to arrive to the land of Canaan. And if you look in the parasha, Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Ayesh ba'etz im ayin." What does it mean? Go see if there is a tree. If not, what tree? What's the difference? What, are you going to hide behind the tree? No. It says, if there is a tzaddik that is able to guarantee success in your mission. And what happened the day they arrived to Canaan? Eov passed away. That day, Eov passed away. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu says. Im yesh ba'etz, im ayin. If there is a tzaddik, make a U-turn. Because it's not the time. That day, Eov passed away. The pasuk writes, "Vayavo ad nahal eshkol." They arrived to a place called the lake or the river of Eshkol. And allow me basically to tell you what's so important about this pasuk. I just need to find it in the Chumash because that pasuk also describes who were the inhabitants of the land at that moment. And now the pasuk says right here, "Vayavo ad nahal eshkol." They arrived to the nahal called Eshkol. Eshkol also means, how do you call this in the cluster? The cluster of grapes. That's the meaning of Eshkol. Vayichretu misham zemora. They caught part of the vine, be'eshkol anavim echad, and one cluster of grapes. How many people needed to carry a cluster of grapes? 2. Now, I ask you a question. I understand that sometimes you need 2 people to carry a table or a sofa. If you go to a public supermarket now and you say, "I'd like to buy a cluster of grapes," how big is a cluster of grapes? It fits in the palm of your hand. So what is the Torah telling us? That the fruits of Israel then were giant size. That they needed 2 people to carry it. We don't understand. Okay? Now, comes the Zohar Kadosh. And it says as follows. The Zohar takes the Nahal. Nahal means from Lashon Nahala. What's the meaning of the word Nahala? Inheritance. Nahala, it's called inheritance. In the Moroccan or in the Northern African, when they have a memorial service, how they call it? Nahala. The inheritance service is a hint that somebody passed away. But they say a nice refined word, like the ereye in Mexico, or the ereyat in the Syrian world, or askara in Israel, and meldado for the Turkish. So everybody's happy. Okay? So it says, this message of the Zohar Kadosh writes, and it says, how great is the power of the learning of Torah, that the zechut of the learning of Torah mechaper al kol hata'av. So powerful is the merit and zechut of Torah learning that purifies the person from the averot. And the Zohar Kadosh brings a pasuk from the book of Yeshaya HaNavi. Ko amar akel Hashem borei hashamayim, the creator of the world, benotehen, and everything else that is planted in the world. Among the plantings of God, of Hashem, there are specific plantings that have a direct effect in the entire world. There are chairs available next to me. You don't have to pay a VIP premium, to be more comfortable. I don't mind, just move them a bit. So if I move my hands, I don't touch you. Right? So move the chairs a bit and feel free to sit. Anyways, so the Zohar Kadosh explains, what else is planted in the world? The Torah, the Jewish people. Where do we learn it from? From the Beracha of the Sefer Torah. Behaye olam nata betochenu. No Natan. Some people, due to the lack of knowledge perhaps, may say Natan. Natan is in the beginning. But Nata is different. Natan means to give. Meaning to say, I have an object, okay? You extend your hand, you receive the object. The object can be separated from the recipient because it's a third item. Nata means implanted. Once it's implanted, becomes part of you. That's the difference. So how the Pasuk writes in the Navi, Borei Hashamayim Benotehem, it says the Zohar Kadosh, how great and how powerful is the aspect of Torah learning that is considered Ke'ilu Makriv Kol HaKorbanot DeAlma. If you have in front of you two options, 10 sacrifices to the Holy Temple and Torah learning, which one is greater? Torah learning. Because sacrifices are good. And God forbid, we're not minimizing. Today we don't have sacrifices, but we have Torah learning. Sacrificing to give a korban in certain cases is a biblical commandment, but if you don't have it, through Torah learning, we can substitute one for the other. And not only that, certain transgressions cannot be forgiven just by offering. There is certain additional requirements that they need to be met for the tikkun, it's complete. But it says the Zohar Kadosh that the zechut of the Torah learning is able to purify and to forgive even sins which a sacrifice cannot forgive. Goes further the Zohar Kadosh. It says something fascinating. It says that when the world was about to be created, and we know well that despite the fact that we have a physical, beautiful world, but the creation of the world was not God's ultimate purpose. The world was as a middle agent for humans. The ultimate purpose of the creation of the world was for the human being be created and have a physical world to live in. But the Zohar also says in today's class, the Torah existed 2,000 years before the creation of the world. In other words, the Torah was created. The Torah was put in storage until came the right time for the creation of the world. The Zohar Kadosh says also that the Torah became the blueprint of creation. What is the blueprint? The engineer, the architect, looks at the blueprint and builds accordingly. That's exactly what the Torah is. The Zohar Kadosh writes, Istakel be'oraita ubara yad alma. God looked at the plans of the Torah, and the world was created accordingly. So the Zohar Kadosh writes, and it says that there is like a abstract dialogue in the heavenly courts. And the question is towards God. And the question went something like this. Dear God, you're planning to create the world. And the purpose of creating the world is to benefit mankind. But you're going to create a human that after 120 years will leave the world. So why to create a human to begin with? And the Torah says, look how many times it says, and he was born and passed away. And he was born by He by Yamod, by Yamod by He by Yamod, like ping pong. You know, so it says in Zohar HaKadosh, it says that they asked God, God, why do you spend your time and energy to create a human being that's going to die? It's a good question, but it's a theoretical question. The Zohar utilizes this to give us the answer. What is the true purpose of the creation of the person in the world? So the Zohar HaKadosh writes, and it says, because only in the physical world, when the person has all these components of physical life and the spiritual life. Let me clarify. I like to clarify the following. In Shamayim, what do you think it happens? After the person went through the motions, the welcoming reception, the welcoming committee, the heavenly justice system, after all that is behind the person, what does the person's neshama does in Shamayim? Learns Torah. Learns Torah. That's all you do. No break time, no need for break. And I'm going to say something publicly that I never said before. I only said it to 2 people, 3 people in the world. 1, 2, 3. Maybe 4. Over a month ago, on Shabbat night, on a Friday night, I had a dream with Mr. David Tower. Where did I meet him? In the yeshiva in Shamayim. I came back, don't worry. Scary. I come into the room, big room, don't ask me the location, don't even ask me who was the rabbi teaching the Gemara class, but I come into the room, I stand by the door, and I recognize some people, and many people I did not recognize. If you ever ask me if they ever went to that hall or to that synagogue, never in my life. I never saw such a shul. It was a big synagogue, and it was divided into sections. And then when I come into the room, who do I see? David Tower. With his glasses, his nice shirts and pants. I'm not sure if he was wearing the funny hat or a baseball cap like he used to wear. He gets up, says, Rabbi, what are you doing here? I say, I don't know, I'm dreaming. Says, everything good? Unbelievable, he tells me. Unbelievable, he tells me. We say goodbye, and I woke up the next morning for Shaharit. Thank God. Now we understand the Zohar of today. The Zohar says, after the person goes through their motions in life, and everybody knew Mr. Towel, that he, we know for a fact that he used to learn 5 o'clock in the morning, 4:30, 5:30 with Rabbi Mendel, and then will come to us. And I learned with him many years Gemara class, and he was a true fighter in a good sense. When you learn Gemara, it's not one way. Sometimes you have debates and interesting questions, and I knew that whenever he will ask questions, I better be ready for him. Because his questions was not, what's the meaning of this word? His questions will be much deeper to truly understand how the Gemara arrived to such a concluding details. And the Zohar HaKadosh writes, and it says that through the zechut of Torah learning in this world, also paves the way for Torah learning after the person makes a U-turn from the physical life and meets the Creator in the biggest yeshiva, known Yeshiva Shel Ma'ala, the heavenly yeshiva. There are 2 yeshivot in the world. Remember the night of Kippur, before Kal Nidre, how do we say? Bishiva Shel Ma'ala, Bishiva Shel Mata. In the heavenly court system of the yeshiva world and the yeshiva of the physical world, they are parallel, as the Ben Ish Chai writes, in some similar aspect. But the Zohar Kadosh explains, and it says that besides Torah learning, there is an investment that a person must make in life. Emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Faith in God. And that's not something that you buy in Whole Foods. Even though it's a good vitamin to take. Vitamins of Emunah is great to take. But you can buy it in Whole Foods. You can buy it in Living Emunah. You can buy it by connecting to Chachamim. And you get it through Torah learning. The Zohar Kadosh reinforces this concept. And it says, the person is allowed to ask questions when they learn Torah. In other words, if someone asks a question, the Zohar Kadosh says, it means that a person has the interest of learning Torah. But there is a limit. There is a limit on the questions that you ask or that we ask. What does it mean, the limit? It doesn't mean, okay, you're allowed to ask only one question a day. Okay, that's not what it means. It means there are topics that we can ask questions, but there are topics that we don't ask questions. For example, I'll bring a few questions on the table. Okay? A simple one to relate to. The Torah begins. What's the first word in the Sefer Torah? Hazak. Bereshit. How the Bereshit begins? Which letter? Bet. You know why not the Aleph and yes the Bet? Short answer. Look at the shape of the Bet. The shape of the Bet is telling me, don't look up, don't look down, don't look back, look forward. Because you will never be able to understand before Bereshit. What happened before Bereshit? No one knows. Do you know? I don't know. Do you know? Maybe you're a Hacham Bashi. Do you know? Nobody knows. Not even the 6-foot iguana traveling outside. I don't know. Unbelievable. Look at right behind you. She'll be coming now. She comes to the class every day, by the way.
It's a gilgul.
I know, definitely. For sure. Okay, so that's the reason why the Torah begins with a bet. Besides Berachala we heard earlier. But the shape of the bet is telling me, look forward. You're going to try to understand before and above and beyond. It's impossible for us to understand. The Zohar Kadosh writes and it says, but everything else, every Yehudi is given an opportunity. That's the reason why, one of the reasons the Torah was given in the desert. Why the Torah was given in the desert? Because no one can claim ownership, or nobody wants to claim ownership in the desert. You don't see the Palestinians fighting for the Sahara Desert. You want the Sahara Desert? Fadda, take it. Take it and keep the change. You know why the Torah was given in the desert? Like the desert has no ownership, the Torah has no ownership. We can all be partners and owners of the Torah. No one can sell, no. You are crossing your boundaries of Torah learning. There is no such a thing. The Torah is yours, the Torah is mine. No one has copyright or patent of Torah. The Torah is available, munach lekol Israel. In other words, a person wants to have access to the Torah, Fadal, we'll give you the password. Why not? Comes the Zohar Kadosh, and it goes even further, and it says, we need to understand that in the world of godliness, there are two aspects of it. The revealed aspect of godliness and the hidden aspects of godliness. The revealed, we see. We see each other. We see the beautiful world. We see situations. We see people, families, friends, livelihood. We see different scenarios of life. But there is an area of life, says the Zohar Kadosh, that is nistar. Nistar means hidden. No one knows it. No one knows the future, and no one knows why things happen between people. And there is a pasuk in Safra, Devarim, that says, Hanistarot LaHashem Elokeinu. The hidden facts, sometimes people ask, and why this happened to this person? He's such a nice fellow. Why this happened to this lady? She's such a wonderful lady. Why this happened to a, God forbid, a young child, beautiful baby? We don't have answers. As much pain is involved in these questions, we have no answer. We don't understand the ways of Hashem. And that's what the Pasuk says. Hanistarot LaHashem Elokeinu. There is an aspect of life that this is only by God. We don't live enough to understand life. We live whatever amount of years Hashem gives us. But do I know what happened 150 years ago? What did I put an Apple tracker on the fellow 150 years ago, and let me follow him through life? Oh, now I understand. He owed you money from now. That's why you owe him money now. Because actually, you're collecting from what he owes you. But you need to be the Baal Shem Tov, more or less, to be able to decipher such a transition in life. And the second part of the Pasuk says, והנקלוט לנו ולבנינו עד עולם לעשות את כל דברי התורה הזאת. It says, whatever is revealed, we have a mission statement. My goal in life is to become a true ambassador of God in the world. How do I do that? לעשות את כל דברי התורה הזאת. To learn the Torah, to live by the Torah, and to utilize the Torah as a GPS of life. And this is how the Zohar Kadosh in part concludes the message of today, and it says, this is going to continue only for a limited time. It will come a time in history, says the Zohar Kadosh, that Be'ezat Hashem will have the zechut of Mashiach's arrival. That's our whole goal and expectations every day, the way the Rambam writes. It says, on that moment, when that miracle will happen, we'll see life with a different set of lenses. Today we see it in a certain way. Mashiach comes, the Pasuk writes that one of the ultimate goals and purposes for Mashiach to come, it will not only a benefit for the Jewish people, it will be for the entire world. As the Pasuk writes, "Umaliyah ha'aretz de'aret Hashem kamayim layam mechasim." The world will be filled with godly knowledge like the water covers the ocean. That is the message of the Zohar of today. The halacha of today discusses the rules of Hazzanim. It's a touchy subject. It's a very touchy subject. So I'll give you the mild version today because I gotta be somewhere in a few minutes. So it's your lucky day. It's your lucky day. Tomorrow I'll give you the full version. Monday morning quarterback. Okay? So it says as follows, that Hazzanim need to be properly dressed for prayers, number one. Number two, the pronunciation of the letters. What does it mean? A shaliach sibur, a representative of the kahal, must be able to pronounce the different letters which unfortunately many people fail to pronounce. For example, the Lecha brings a few examples. The letter Aleph, the letter He, and the letter Ain. The He, you hear the pronunciation, He. Aleph, milder. Ain, from the throat. Ain, Ain, Ain. Hu, Ish. You see the difference? But what happened? I'll bring you one example, easy to relate to. Shema. Second paragraph. The pasuk says, "Ul'obdo bechol levavchem," to serve God with all your heart. And that's the reason why in this word and a few others, the Siddur says, pronounce the Ain. Why? Because Ul-Obdo means to serve God. Ul-Obdo is to get rid of God. Bar Minnah. Kapish? Ul-Obdo. Ain. Another case. Zain, Sin. Lema'an tizkeru. To remember is this week's parasha. The final paragraph of this week's parasha is the third paragraph of Kriyat Shema, the mitzvah of Sisit. We'll discuss about it later on in the week, Be'ezat Hashem. Now, there the Lacha also says, pronounce the Zayin. Lema'an tizkeru. Why tizkeru? Tizkeru means zecher, to remember. But what if I say, lema'an tizkeru? You know what it means? For you to lease, to rent. One is to remember God, and one is to rent God. And if you say lema'an tishkeru, it means to get drunk. Shikor.
Shikor is a drunken, yeah.
So you see, Zayin, Sin, Shin. Or this is, let's clarify. This is just in the pronunciation of the letters. Then there is the reading. For example, there is a pasuk in the Korbanot before Kaddish. The pasuk, the Mishnah there says, Az panim lagehinam. Az means brazen. A person with audacity. That's Az. Az is a goat. It's an animal. Nothing to do. But sometimes people confuse. Or for example, Shin and Sin. Shin and Sin. It changes the whole meaning. And that's part of the message of the halacha. So there are more things to say, but I think that we'll finish the class here today for good reason, Baruch Hashem, and Belinada will try to devote a few minutes to discuss minimum basic requirements of people being Hazzanim of the synagogues, which at the end of the day, the Pelei Yoais calls a Hazan a Kohen Gadol, and the Lacha calls a Hazan a Shaliach Sibur, a representative of the Kahal Kadosh. In answer to the words of Torah, elevates the neshamot of Eliyahu ben Lela alav shalom and David ben Polin alav shalom as well. Shavua tov u'mevorach. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen. Rabbi Hananiah ben Akashia